Boom.
That's quite the jam you got going on. I don't think I've heard the entry music before.
That's just the StreamYard basic ones. But I need to get like some ZLS branded entry point at some time though. But we've got a new week. We've got a new week of ZLS 030, and our first guest today or this week is Corbin Crutchley. Corbin and I kind of met through streaming, which is kind of cool. Opening new doors all the time. So, Corbin, you have your own channel, and last I saw you were making some calendars, and I hear you like making calendars and tables, and that in itself just endears you to me because I love a good table. So,
yeah, I have been using Vue 2 in the past, and I've just been like finding an excuse to work on Vue 3, and I'm like, oh, I want to play with the compositions API, and like the first thing that popped in my head was calendar. We've made calendars before. Let's do another one. So yeah, I spent 2 streams working on a calendar. I might do it again this week. I'm not sure. There's a little bit of cleanup I needed to do, but yeah, I stream on Crutchcorn on Twitch, and I was I was following some people on Twitter, and I kept seeing ZLS pop up, and I was like starstruck by the guest list, and I was like, oh man, that's awesome. I got to go check it out.
Awesome, man. Well, glad we made something worth getting some buzz about. Let me get your channel up here so we can link it in chat so everyone can check it out. And yeah, so recently you've been working on Vue 3. What's the appeal of Vue 3?
So I'm a fan of a lot of the flexibility and kind of like the magic that comes with Vue.
Okay.
I find that I'm personally not a massive fan. I've done a lot of React in the past, but I'm not a huge fan of combining the logic with the templating that JSX provides. And because of that, both Angular and Vue really called me. And I'm one of those people that likes to learn and experiment with new things. So like, oh, Vue's popular. I might as well go check it out. Yeah. And then when I dive into it, I'm like, oh man, computed props are really cool. And like, you know, you can use classes with it for some third-party stuff, and with the composition API, you know, it just seems like they've got a cool community, a lot of cool tech going on behind the hood. Cool.
Yeah. Did you happen to see me and Wes did an episode on Vue?
I think I was there for that episode. I just don't remember a ton about it.
We struggled very hard. We were trying to mess with the new composition API. We were just kind of struggling with it. Right. But I know there's some magic about Vue because I've known people who talk about it and who have loved it. So I'm very intrigued when I hear someone who likes Vue because I'm trying to understand the appeal.
Actually, I think it was your episode that inspired me to do Vue. I just remember I was watching the stream and I had to go early for some reason. And I was just like, man, I want to play with Vue.
Nice.
so hey, that was what inspired.
I said on Twitter over the weekend, my 2 biggest goals for ZLS was learning how to present and how to talk better. And second was just inspiring people. So I inspired B-Man. He just said, hey there. Hey, B-Man.
Hey, B-Man.
I inspired him to do BLS. Corbin, you were already streaming before, but inspiring you to check out some Vue stuff.
Yeah.
Even if me and Wes had a terrible time and struggle bust all the way through, glad some good came out of it. Yeah. So awesome, man.
Yeah.
Very cool. So tell us a little bit about your history getting into web development. Where are you in your career? How long have you been in this business now?
That's a good question, and one like I have an answer for you, but I always still mull it over in my head whenever I have to like think about answering. Yeah. So I've been doing programming, the vague programming term, for about 5 years now.
Okay.
But for the first 2 years, it was like strictly Python programming, a tiny bit of networking programming with some REST APIs. I was a system administrator for those 2 years. And that was my first job after high school. It was super weird and random. I like interned for a place for a year, and then they're like, all right, fine, you can be our sysadmin. We don't know.
So you just jumped into full-time work after high school. There was no cool. That's what I'm trying to pitch to my kids. My boys are 12 and 10 right now, so they're approaching that age where they gotta start thinking about this. So that's really cool though.
And I've got super lucky. Like I'm 21, and I left high school a little bit early for very, very complicated reasons.
Sure.
So, like, on my resume, I can be totally candid, and I can say I've done programming for
5 years of experience. Yeah.
Even though I'm 21, which is
absolutely,
you know, something that a lot of people can't be able to say.
Yeah. Well, meanwhile, I came out of, so I did 2 rounds in college. First one, I came out with a theology degree of all things. And I ended up just doing, I ended up being like a low-level bank manager with that, but decided to go back into programming. And so I got another bachelor's degree. I'm entering the workforce at 28 years old with 0 years of experience. And like, I don't know, I guess I know some things. But yeah. I don't know. It's I think if I could do it all over, I'd go the Corbin route and just have 5 years of experience at age 21.
You know, though, I know that I've gotten incredibly lucky, but I want to make sure that I'm not coming off as like, oh, I'm young and so much cooler. Like some of the best engineers I know didn't start programming until later in their life. Some engineers I work with are fantastic engineers that just didn't start off early, and that there's nothing wrong with that. You know, like we all just take different paths and stuff. I just don't want to come off as like this arrogant, oh yeah.
No, yeah, I don't think you're coming off that way at all. But yeah, I get what you're saying though. Like you're humble. I get that. You're a humble hustler. That's kind of the vibe I get from your channel, at least. So
well, thank you.
Very cool.
But yeah, after that, I started at a startup. They had seen some of I really got into material design for a while, and I built a little web utility that helped like pick colors from material design. And this startup in the local area hired me, worked for them for about 2.5 years. And then I did a stint at Hilton for about a year until I got laid off, which was part of like a massive COVID bad.
Okay.
And then now I'm at Cooper Vision, which is like a contact lens manufacturing doing Angular.
Oh, nice. Very nice. What's your experience with Angular? That's kind of my bubble, is the Angular bubble.
So my first full-time programming job, right after the startup that I was talking about, they were a full Angular shop. They didn't do it like we did Angular. We did the mean stack, Angular, Mongo, you know, the works. So I did that for about 2.5 years, and then. So
is that? I'm trying to figure out what year this is. Is this Angular 2+ or is this Angular JS?
2+. Thank goodness. We started with 2+, which I'm very happy with. And then I've just followed ever since. And then my current job is Angular, so about 2.5, 3 years experience altogether with Angular.
Very nice. Very nice. Well, enough to write this killer article on NG templates. So I'm looking forward to getting into that.
Yeah, that article in particular took me 3 months to write, not because of how long it is necessarily, but because I wanted to make sure that I was getting the information correct. And because of it, I did like this super deep dive into Angular's compiler source code, and I read all the like. I went too far into the research portion. I should have just probably written some of it first.
Well, so I've got a decent sized helping of imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
So part of that for me comes from just like going from not making very much money to getting into a full-time position coding, and that jump I hear will do it to you. But there's like some superpowers that come with that. Like there's a lot of negative stuff that come with that, like doubting yourself and stuff. But it makes it so that when you produce content like that, it makes you like make sure you know what you're talking about, and that will like, yes, it's good for writing that article, but it's also really, really good for you as a developer personally, just to have a really good understanding of that kind of stuff.
Well, and it's why I honestly went into like, so for a bit of context behind, so I run an art blog called Unicorn Utterances. It's got a ton of awesome contributors to it. It's where the blog that you're talking about is hosted. And I started it because I not interned, but I taught at a UC Davis boot camp. And long story short, I found a lot of the situation going on there was kind of immoral. Like I felt like they weren't treating the students quite right, and they were like charging too much money. I just wasn't very comfortable there. But what I learned during my time there was that like the more I was teaching people, I was learning things like 10 times better than I would have if I would have just tried to go on my own project. Like there's definitely that aspect of teaching others where it's like, you have to really, really grasp what you're talking about and do a deep dive into those things in order to teach it, which I really liked.
Yeah.
So
awesome. So tell me a little bit about your stream. How long have you been streaming for now?
I've been streaming now for about 6, maybe 7 months.
Okay.
The biggest reason why I started streaming is that I started working on an app called GitShark, which is like Git Kraken or the GitHub desktop app, but for your phone. Doing that in React Native. And then I started a company off of it called OceanBit. So
nice.
Yeah.
Dude, I was not aware of this. I got to check it out.
Yeah.
So is the idea that you can like code on your phone?
Yeah.
That would be awesome.
So in the future, what I'm going to work on, my first app is just the Git client, because I know that there's some other IDEs that are on mobile that work pretty well for now. But yeah, I thought that there wasn't really a good solution for keeping track of your Git files visually on your phone. And then the next app that I'm going to work on, we'll see how it goes, but I want to try to embed the Monaco editor into your phone so that you can use either like an iPad or your phone to do all your programming. You have like your programming environment, and then you have your Git desktop, and you know. Dude,
that's awesome. That's really, really cool.
Yeah, thank you.
We got to have you back on sometime just to talk about that.
I'm totally down. I'm actually writing a talk right now. So one of the issues that we hit with GitShark is that mobile file systems are really, really, really particular about what you want to do. So like reading and writing files, they want you to keep things in a specific place. Right. So I'm writing a really lengthy article about that I'm turning into a talk about like, hey, you're writing a React Native app. Here's what you want to do for your file systems. So
awesome. That sounds great, man.
Yeah.
All right. Well, you want to turn attention to your article on structural directives?
Sure. Let me share my screen here.
Yeah, let me add that in.
All right.
There you go. Let me remove some of this stuff so we can see it better.
Awesome. So yeah, this is admittedly, I think, the longest article on the website.
I think you had a word count at the top, right? It's like 10,000 words.
10,000. Yeah, you know, it's a little long.
So before having the stream, I checked this article to make sure I grasped everything that was going on. And I remember like getting through a couple examples and thinking, wait, the scroll bar is not very far down. And then I went to the top and I saw the 10,000 words. I was like, oh, dang, he really went deep on this.
Yeah, so. I tried to make the from start to source as legitimately honest as I could be. I was kind of inspired by Dan Abramov's deep dives into React. And I just felt like there's not a whole lot of that same type of content on the Angular side of things, you know? Like there's Angular in depth, which I definitely appreciate, and there's some other good resources. But
I was going to mention that because I don't know. I don't know if I'm technically a part of them anymore or not. I was kind of at the beginning when Max was doing everything. But yeah, I've had Lars on several times. He does a lot of stuff with them.
Yeah, so which is really exciting.
They're great, but they're trying to move away from just being Angular, I believe. So they're trying to
make sense.
Branch out into the other stuff. But yeah, this definitely qualifies as a deep dive. I'd wager. So
but let's start with this, how Angular tracks the UI. So in HTML, we'll have something like this where let me zoom in a little bit, where your HTML will construct what's called a tree. If you're familiar with like what a tree is, it's just a representation of some data in your code. And that tree ends up looking like this, where you have a parent of main, you have two children, which are the paragraph tag and the unordered list tag. Those are both siblings to each other. And then the unordered list also has its own children, which are the list items. And when you use CSS, something like IDB children list items, you'll be selecting this item and then applying the styling to the children of that, right? So pretty straightforward. With Angular, there's a bit of added complexity where there's also this idea of templates and views. So you have what's called like an ng template, right? And if you don't use this ng template outlet, it will never render.
Right.
So you have this concept of like this template, which is kind of like this concept in your head that you keep track of that you don't actually ever render. And then once you use template outlet, you create what's called a view that's based off of this template.
Right.
And this can go pretty deep. You can have view containers, which keep track of like multiple different views and elements inside of the view. And even components use this logic to have what's called a host template or a host view. And that host view then has its own children. And like, if I intentionally picked super simple examples for these because this is a complicated graph and it only gets much worse when you start getting real apps involved.
For sure. Yeah. So going back to the DOM tree. So the DOM tree there's nothing Angular about that. That's just kind of how the web works.
Yeah.
But then when we throw the Angular flavoring inside, it's like we bring in the concept of the template. And like you were explaining, like I always thought of templates almost as like, so a template without the outlet, it's kind of like a function. Like it's something that returns some HTML, but it's not actually itself HTML. And then so you have like this reference to this function, and then you can kind of like stamp it out in other different places. So I think the place most people will be familiar with like the ng template is using like ng if else, right? So the way if else's will work is you use the ng if structural directive, and you can pass an else parameter into that directive that can point to an ng template. This is how I was forced to learn about WTF is a ng template because I learned you need one of these to do an else. So, and I remember thinking, well, what's going on with this template? If I don't reference it in that else, it just disappears. So what gives?
Right.
So.
Well, and something that I find interesting is that structural directives, I'm actually bringing up the ngif docs for a reason. Structural directives are just directives. Yeah, with a little asterisk at the beginning to mean something slightly different. So you'll notice here that this div with a star ngif is exactly the same thing as adding an ng template with the ngif directive on top of it.
Yeah.
So again, if you just had this ng template without the ng if, like let's say true, then this would never render. But then if you had true here, then it would render, which is exactly what you were talking about too.
Right. So and this kind of gets into directives versus structural directives too.
Right.
So I don't know if you want to talk about that more, but we had been talking a little bit before the show started where components are just directives with extra sugar on top, right?
Right. So if we scroll down, when we define a component with a template here, what we're really saying is define a directive with this as a template that we then Angular then like kind of automatically renders and handles the life cycles for us. But the life cycles aren't just for components. You can have like ng on init and ng on destroy on directives as well. And that's the reason why is because the idea of like that instantiation lifecycle occurs on both directives and components just inherit that logic from directives. So then you're ended up with stuff like this host view on the component. But in reality, it's no different than having a directive with some special sugar for templates.
Yeah, I think actually component like extends directive too. If you look at this
exactly.
So cool stuff there.
Yeah.
I actually, since using Angular 2, I don't know if I've actually ever used a directive by itself without doing a component. So I've never found a good use case for it. I have seen other places in code bases and like people on my team using directives, but I've always seen it always appeared to me that a component is usually the better fit, but I don't know.
Yeah,
have you ever had a good use case for a directive by itself?
I actually have. So one of the things that I did at the startup was we were building a construction app, right? So like the idea was you could input like different data sets and like it would keep track of your construction site and all sorts of other stuff.
Okay.
Well, the problem there is that we wanted to make the app as super simple as possible, right? Like we didn't want to have to set up like this expensive support tier system because we're like 4 developers in a room making an app trying to make money, you know? So what we did was they tasked me with programming what was called like our first usage tutorials, basically.
Okay.
So what we would have is we would have these components, and the first time you ever saw the component, it would scroll to the component and pop up this little like alert bar that said, this is how you use it, click next, 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 you know, etc. And the nice part was, because we had a directive, we could have a lifecycle method. We could have the check if it was the first time that you ever saw it or not. We could have the scrolling logic, and we could just append this one tiny directive onto any component with, like, you know, a special message and some other stuff. And that would handle everything for us. And that was like a perfect use case for a directive, is because we had multiple components that had this logic, but we wanted to simplify it and, you know, make it easy to develop for.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, I think before the stream started, I was telling you about how on a previous team we had done something with a directive that was like role-based permissions based on that directive. So that, I guess maybe I lied a little bit. I actually didn't touch the code for that. I just kind of like said, yes, this works. Good job, team.
Right. Well, and for structural directives, like you were saying, like, so feature flags, I didn't want to have to inject the service for the feature flags into every instance where we needed an ngIf. Instead, I built a copy of ngIf with the service already pre-injected. And then that way we could just say feature flag if, and then just conditionally display parts of the UI depending on whether you have the feature flag enabled or not.
Very cool. So it was in effect like almost like a wrapper around ngIf, but that brought in this your service as well.
Yeah.
Interesting. That's very cool.
And what's nice is that the ngIf isn't actually particularly difficult code to understand once you understand the basics. In fact, this article goes over that as well. We build both ngIf and ng4. So
very cool. Do you want to take a look at these?
Sure, why not? In order to explain some of these, though, I am going to have to take a tiny step back and go over what view children are, or view child. So let's do that really quick. Let's open a Stack Blitz. And let me see if I can find the page with... I had 49 examples.
You do a much better job of naming your Stack Blitzes than I do, man.
Well, I knew I was going to get lost in that article, so when I got to naming them, I just put in numbers, and that's why you see like number 49 for that one or 39 for that one article.
Most of mine are just like the random hash it gives you.
Right.
When I generate it. I'm gonna do a bad job of. I try to name the ones that are important, but it's hard. Sometimes they just escape me. Yeah,
I feel that. Kando UI, we love you, but it's a little hard to see the rest of the app. So
benefits of being a developer, right there.
Exactly.
No more ads.
So here we have. Let me see if I can scroll out the code a little bit more.
Sure.
Here we have a component that has a div, a paragraph tag, and two my custom components.
Okay.
And here we have something called a view children directive, or not directive, decorator. It's like, what is it called? And here we pass in what we're looking for. I'll get to another syntax that we can pass in, but we can pass in this for now, which is we're looking for any of the components that are instances of the my component. That's terribly named, but any instances of my component.
Yeah.
I should say custom.
So the idea here is we are creating a query list that's going to look at our template. It's going to gather up all the my component components, and we're going to have a query list object inside of our class that we can reference. So it's kind of like being able to access the DOM tree, kind of like to access certain pieces of the DOM tree from inside of our class, right?
Well, and here I'm mentioning the my custom component, so I can do things like my custom component 0 dot input here.
Yeah.
No, sorry. Yes. Oh, I'm sorry. It's a subscription, so I'd have to do .subscribe. Right. I forgot that it was a subscription.
The query list API has always been interesting. I don't have it like solidly in my head right now, but I remember doing a lot of odd things with observables to try to get things right exactly as I like them. I actually like using view child quite a bit.
Yeah.
So instead of using like the making outputs do stuff in the template, like with the parentheses, sometimes I like just having a view child to the component and then just like using that output property as an observable. Makes things kind of nicer. But you get into weird stuff with the hooks. It's got to be there already, so you've got to like wait until after view init, or you got to wait until component init. So anyways,
and then you have to get static involved. And
yeah. Well, so static is kind of neat because if your view children are actually static, it makes things a lot easier because you don't have to worry about the view init hook so much. You can just wait; it'll just be there come ng on init, and I think that'll help you with a lot of those like expression changed after check errors that I used to get a lot.
Yeah, so I get a lot of. In fact, that's the #1 search query that brings people to this article.
Oh yeah,
because I mentioned the kind of exactly the same point. But I was writing this article right as Angular 9 was coming out, and there was no concept of the static before then.
Yeah,
The beta versions had made it optional, and the non-beta versions made it required.
Yes.
So like they broke my article in between releases, and it like frustrated the heck out of me because I had to go and change a bunch of stuff right before release.
It broke a lot of stuff. Coming on.
So I called that article, that section of the article, the bane of all JavaScript developers.
Yeah. Yep. So the error with that is like if stuff changes between hooks in ways it doesn't expect, you're going to have a bad time, and that's you'll at least see the error. It's kind of you probably won't have that bad of a time, but you're doing things in a way Angular doesn't expect. It doesn't expect things to happen between like the what is it called, like view check and do check. I think those are wrong, but
yeah, that sounds generally about right. I think do check is the one we're thinking of. Oh, cool! I'm not signed in. I thought I was, but okay.
Weird.
What's happening? Wasn't I just signed in?
You're definitely signed in because we saw all your blitzes.
Yeah, or maybe no. I guess I wasn't signed in. I guess I just went to my page. Oh well. Weird.
Oh, okay.
Cool. Yeah. So there's also there's also the ability to do view child.
Yes.
Right? So I could import view child here, and then
you don't have to worry about the query list.
Right. Well, and also I don't have to worry so much about. So that won't work, right? No, hang on. Template or not template ref, element ref. I can't remember if there's a generic for it.
I don't think there is. I think it's just element ref. Yeah. And you would get like dot native. I forget what it is. I'm blank on the API right now. But
hang on. I got to look up the Angular API for it really quick.
Sure. Yeah, this is how people learn. So
yeah. Well, and even like I've used it tons of times before. I just can never exactly remember. I think it's complaining because I don't have.
Yeah.
There we go.
There you go.
So now I can do a reference to the native element, right? Yeah. And then it'll give me the paragraph tag since I had. I'm adding a template template variable here called test. And then the view child is requesting to get the template variable of test, and then I can reference the HTML paragraph element in like fun ways. So
can you just use CSS selectors in view child? I actually forget if you can do that or not. I always do what you just did there, where you use the hashtag to name it.
You might be able to, but I don't think you can. That might be a view children, maybe. Let's Google it. All the valid things. Blah, 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 blah. I don't think you can.
Okay.
Yeah, so, it looks like it's getting deep into like voodoo magics here. They're like, here, if you want to rewrite it, sure. Yeah, I don't think you can.
Cool. Well, at least we have a way of figuring it out here with the name at least.
Yeah. So what were we going to do? We were going to make ngIf, right?
Yeah.
So
maybe we could just talk about the static real quick. What the static does is it singles to Angular. So if you change that after view init, I think you could just change that to a regular old ng on init, and it'll be there, right? Whereas, so if we just change that to ng on init, I think we should see the same output we're seeing now.
Right.
But if we change that static to false, we'll get cat. Don't know what this is. So that's when we have to hook back into the on view init. Yeah. So interesting stuff there. So the static, the idea for static is you're signaling to Angular, will this always be there, yes or no? If it's always there, it can have it ready for you on init. Otherwise, you're going to have to wait for after view init, and then it will be able to find it. So
it comes in handy in particular with instances like this, where you have an ngIf as a container, because if you're rendering it conditionally, it's not always going to be there, even if it's always true. Right. So like, because of this, if I set this to true and then we go back, it's still not going to be able to find it because this hooks into an earlier lifecycle method.
Yeah. Because we're lying to it right now.
Right. So it's only on top level, actually static, not in structural directives. So
cool, man.
Yeah. I love lying it to Angular. It's a fun time.
This week on ZLS, lying to Angular. Nice.
Great. So the cool part here is that we can also do template. We can also do, instead of just an element ref or a component ref or whatever, we can also do a template ref. I'm going to type it as any because I don't think we're going to have a very fun time if I just...
What does the generic do there? Is that like the variables you pass to the template, or how does that work?
As far as I know, this is like the component type of the template. Templates can be like, so C is, it's not showing, but as far as I know, it's something along the lines of like what data is actually present on the template. I could be wrong on that though. But then if we open up our console, because StackBlitz is complaining about it being too large, we can see that it gives us a template ref, which has some other voodoo magics.
There's that element ref we started out with on the paragraph. So neat.
But then we can do things like if we reference the article, where is it? Trying to see an example of like an easy to use. Yeah, okay. We'll do a template outlet. So let's say just for the sake of this that we are removing it, we could do a template ref of either test. Come on. Or now that we have the view child, we can also use my custom component, although it will complain about expression changed after because it's not static. So now if we made it static, the error goes away, which is very happy. What else can we do? We also have the... I'm trying to remember because I know, do I have to reference a second place to be able to render it into?
Well, there was, what's the other directive? It's not the template outlet. It's like is it the template context? Is that where you can pass along the template?
Yeah, you can also do template outlet context. So if we do ng template outlet context, and I do equals $implicit hello. I have unescaped. What? That's correct, isn't it?
It looks correct. Let's see. use that.
Oh.
There
we go. I was like, what's going on here?
You got it before I did. Good job.
So I can pass in an implicit value of like this message. And then when we use let-hello, we're able to access that message in the template itself, which is super useful for when you need to pass data into a template, right?
Yeah, I believe that's what that any is for, that generic type is for, looking at the docs here.
Oh, it could be. That would make a lot of sense.
So you can kind of define, this is the context this template expects too.
Right.
So that's pretty neat.
Today
it's just some nice type safety around it.
Yeah, definitely. And then we also have, there we go, embed views. Perfect. We also have view containers, which are, a little weird. Let's do like an ng container.
Yeah. I use ng containers a lot. I actually don't use templates all that much. I have, it's like maybe once a month or so. I'll see a good use for it. But ng containers, I see like good usages for them like once a day.
Right.
But yeah, so the idea for the container, I'll give you my understanding of it, and you can enrich me further. But an ng container is like an element on the DOM that dissolves, right?
Yeah.
Like it's going to look like it's there. It's going to look like it's there in the tree in your when you're in your Angular context. But by the time it gets to the DOM, it'll be gone. It'll just be the result of what happened inside of that. That node, so the node itself will dissolve, and it won't be an additional step further nested in your actual resulting tree.
Exactly. So here we can do something like, I actually need to add a read here. We'll read as template ref.
Okay. And
we'll read here as view container ref. I don't know if it's actually necessary, but I know I get some weird errors sometimes if I don't do that. So it's always better to do it anyways. So we'll do an implements on init since we're doing two static things here. And what we can do with this read view container ref is we can do ng on init. We can do this dot view contain dot create embedded view, this dot template ref.
Boom.
And boom.
We put the one thing in the other. That's pretty awesome. Can we inspect the DOM real quick? I want to see how that looks. I imagine it's just going to look like test inside of the component. But
yeah, because it's not even wrapped inside of a div. Yeah. So it's just going to be body test. Yeah.
No, there it is. There it is. So that's actually really helpful sometimes. I especially when I first got started, it was like a whole bunch of unnecessary divs in places, like nesting inside of those that I didn't really want, and like were semantically just super confusing. So that's where ng container really comes in handy. And using the code that you just put on the screen here, you can kind of like take a template and put it inside of a container. And yeah, can you do that just with the template? Can you do like a template ref right on the container? I don't know.
What do you mean template ref on the container? Like,
we do. Yeah, rather than doing this inside the TypeScript, is there some directive we can just add to the ng container just to say use the test? Template?
Yeah. It would be ng content, ng template outlet.
Okay, same as if it was ng template.
That's a good question.
I wasn't sure if that would work or not. I kind of assumed it would, but
I don't know if it will. That's a good question because I think that might only exist.
Oh, it double rendered it.
Hey,
that's really here. Uncomment it though. It double renders it. Look at that.
Well, yeah, because we're telling it to render once, and then we're reading it. We're telling it to render twice.
And then create a better view. Oh, that makes sense. That makes sense. That's super cool though. So the other thing I wanted to highlight from that, could you undo that real quick? You can. This is something that's like a little foreign to me, but you can absolutely reference other using that hashtag syntax, other elements within your template as well. So before you had the ng template outlet, and you were referencing just the test just from its name rather than from the template ref on the component. So Yeah, like that there.
If I undid this, comment that out for now. We actually don't need either of these.
Right.
And then it still renders properly because we have the variable test and we can reference it directly here. In fact, we could even go deeper. We could, it'll say object. We could render it into
Type it to JSON. Type it to JSON.
Yeah, that'll go really well. Let's watch how
I know it's probably
circular structure.
Oh well, we tried.
Oh well. But yeah. So this is just a different way to do what we're essentially doing here.
Yeah. Well, so the TypeScript, I imagine, comes in especially handy when you got some complicated use case where you got to like adjust things a little bit before just creating the embedded view or pass in some variables or something like that.
Right.
So
I mean, here's a great example. So let's do something like this. Let's say that we want to make it conditional, right? So if false, now it won't render, right? And this may be starting to seem a little familiar, right? Like if we wanted to be able to make a directive here. So let's do that. Let's do, I'm actually going to jump to a kind of different stack blitz because it gives a better,
sure.
Hang on. I got to figure out which one it is. I'm sorry. Create embed context. Is that it? I think that only covers what we just covered. Of course it does.
We're covering a lot of ground here.
Right? Yes, render the template. Hooray for render the template. So here we're doing kind of different things. We can say something along the lines of like we have a separate directive and a separate component here, right? And then we're using content child, which is kind of like view child, but instead of referencing the view itself, we're referencing the child of this directive, right?
Right.
And here we're saying get the template reference child, right? And we're going to tell Angular to inject a view container at the directive itself.
Could you scroll down a bit so we can see the components template? Yeah. So where content children come into play is when you have a component or a directive where the contents, hence content children, the contents of this node is going to be other nodes. So it's pretty much anything between it. So you can actually most people don't do this because sometimes there's not much purpose to it. You can totally make a component and like put stuff inside of that tag. Like most of the times we just create the component and immediately close it. But you can totally put stuff in there. That's what you're doing here. Just instead of a component, we're using the directive right there, the render the template. So using that content child, we're just getting access to that ng template we're sticking in there, right?
Yeah. So and then we're telling Angular to turn this div into a view container reference. And then what we're saying is we want the view container reference, aka this div where the directive is on, to create an embedded view of this template, right? So that's why hello is showing up on screen. If we were to comment this line out, hello would not render on the screen.
Very cool. Very cool. So how do we get that view container ref that's being injected into the constructor? How does that work out?
So this works the same way that like any other dependency injection would work in Angular, right? Where like we ask Angular to go do a thing and then Angular kind of goes and does it, makes it happen. I don't know why I like saying go do so much in programming. Very hard to follow your live stream at my time, 5 a.m.
It's cool, Rids, Casey. Listen, take care of yourself, get your sleep, and check it out on YouTube. Take care of yourself. And we won't mind.
Yeah, not at all.
Thanks for trying though. Appreciate it and for commenting. Oh, we get the heart.
Oh, I thought I had to sneeze. Oh. All right.
So we were talking about how the dependency injection works here on the view.
In this case, it's kind of one of those things where we ask Angular, hey, is there a view container reference? And then Angular goes and checks and says, well, no. but we can make it one. So that's what it does under the hood, is that it kind of takes this div and then creates a view container reference that associates with that div for us under the hood.
Okay. Okay. So from the context of this directive, we now have access to the view container ref that is outside. So that's really a reference to that div that the directive is on.
Right.
Is that correct?
So if we look, we'll see that we have a div, and the create embedded view is a little weird. It doesn't actually create a view inside of it. It creates a view as a sibling to it, which is why we see the div and a paragraph tag next to each other. Kind of weird. It's not what you would expect to see here, but this
may not be what you want too.
Right. You're right. In this case, it's definitely not what you want.
Right.
But you know,
fair enough. Fair enough. Okay, so it's going to create it as a sibling, and that'll give us at least where we can get that paragraph on screen.
And then we can also do things like, tell me this example that I want. Yes, we can do things like passing the context, right? So we have ng template, right? And we have a message. So in this case, we can say, give us a parent reference and give us the template reference, right? From the component or from the template that we're rendering on top of. And then here we have a string that we're passing in of render the template. So notice that the selector is the same name as the input here. This just means that we can have both the directive and the input as the same name. We don't have to do some weird like render the template, render the template message, so on and so forth.
So that selector inside of the directive, inside of the directive decorator, that is telling us that's a CSS selector to identify the node by. But we're taking advantage of naming that input the same way, so we could say this is how you select it up there, but this is also an input property.
Right.
Cool.
And then we pass it as the implicit value to the context. So then we can change this message here. ZLS.
Yeah.
Yeah, I got the branding going. Yeah. And then this let message will update, right?
Yeah.
So that's pretty cool. We can even do things. That's a bad example now. I don't need that anymore. Here we go. We can even pass in Booleans, right? So we could define render the template, true or false. And then we could have an ng in it that renders the template conditionally. So we're passing in template 1 as a template to render. And then we're passing in the context of, this isn't ngIf. This is an alternative to context router outlet. And then here we have the ng template. We're passing the template to render, and then the context to render to it. And there we have it. We have a super mini version of the ng template outlet.
Yeah. Very cool. Yeah. Very, very cool.
Kind of silly, but it works.
Hey. It works. It's interesting for figuring out this kind of stuff. So for these directives that are on the ng template, so we kind of mentioned how structural directives were just directives with like an ng template. I don't know what the right phrasing would be, like implicit on there, but it's going. So what happens when if we wanted to skip a step? Yeah, like that.
Something like
boom,
this, and then context. I might be getting the syntax.
Tricky syntax, so it's very impressive you're able to do this on the fly, but yeah, without reference.
Yes,
yeah, you did it.
I can't believe I did it without reference.
Nice. Very nice. But so we took exactly what you had and we just like sprinkled some sugar on top, made it a structural directive, and boom, 3 lines of code or 3 lines of template
to do the same thing. For some context for anyone that's not familiar with the microsyntax, to explain what the microsyntax is, you'll notice that the wording here is very different from what we had it before, even though it's doing exactly the same thing. That's because what's inside, when you add an asterisk here, the input here is turned into like a pseudo programming language on its own, right? And that's called the microsyntax. And it has such complex rules that I had to make not just one, but 2 entirely different charts to explain how the microsyntax works, which is very fun.
Yeah, I wish there was. I feel like there's not that great documentation on this, so it was really cool to see that in your article.
The only documentation I could find was from a GIST, which they've now turned into an actual page.
Oh, nice. Is it on Angular.io?
It might be. Let me see if I can find it like super quick. But you're gonna laugh at what it is. Angular microsyntax.
So the way I kind of learned these is just like just for pattern matching, essentially. Like I saw things that worked. I was like, I bet this will work. So it's kind of this weird thing where you don't really understand all the rules. But okay, so this actually defines the grammar.
That's the technical grammar explanation. And if you're confused by looking at this, so was I. That's why I made the 2 little charts.
Well, the charts are helpful, I'm sure. But it's nice to actually see some documentation come up on this.
It was added 2 days before I published my article.
Oh, nice.
So I can officially say that I wrote this article when there was no official documentation.
Nice. Oh, nice. Yeah, be sure to check out Crutchley's charts because super helpful.
Yeah. So here, let's see if we can jump a little bit ahead. We won't do the Pig Latin microsyntax example. I've been told that one's very confusing. It's confusing for myself, but I've been told that I should have just removed it entirely.
Nice.
Let's try this conditional render. Let's try this ngIf. You'll know that it's called render this if, which is a little bit wordy, but it's how you know that we wrote it ourselves, darn it. So this is like this is not what is done in Angular source code. Please don't do it this way, but this does work with some asterisks next to work. Just please use ngIf instead. That's all I'm saying. So here we have our, let's show how it's used, right? It's used exactly the same way as ngIf.
Okay.
There's some minor asterisks there, but it's the simple usage of ngIf where you just pass in a Boolean, right? And when we make that toggle true or false, hang on, I'll actually find one of these. I know one of these versions has no. No, okay, whatever. Just pretend that it unrenders. Please, pretend that it underrenders. Okay. Well, you'll notice that a new version renders every time I toggle it true, right?
Okay.
The way that this works is we have, we could actually fix that bug. We'll do that on stream. So we have a template reference, right? Which is where the asterisk is coming from. So we're saying, hey, get that template. We're also saying get the view container reference. So get the reference to this div, right? And then we say we're matching what we were doing before. We're matching the selector to match the set here. And then when we're passing in that Boolean, we set the underscore val to match the Boolean. Yeah, that's not correct. Is it? That was wrongly typed. I'm sorry. Yeah, there we go. I don't know why that showed up weird. So we're passing in a Boolean. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm trying to make sure I'm following. So the value we're passing in is just the Boolean. Okay, that makes sense. Not the actual the actual reference. Okay, that makes more sense. So we're setting that underscore val is going to be our private value, and we're going to update based on that value. Makes sense.
And then if it's true, then we do a create embedded view, this dot template, blah, blah, blah. And then let's see if we can do an else.
Else we're going to want to remove it. I actually don't know how with the API for that, but I imagine you do. There you go. Looks easy enough.
So if it's false, clear the template or the parent view ref.
Makes sense.
And there we have it. A very basic ngIf.
Very, very cool. So I think most people now, like, the benefit of this is kind of seeing, well, like, I don't know if structural directives will come up all that often, like having to make your own in just programming for most use cases. But it's super helpful for understanding the actual nuts and bolts behind Angular and what's going on whenever you use that ngIf or that ng4. And yeah. That's my impression, at least.
And especially if you're using like front-end libraries, I've seen a ton of different libraries that actually implement structural directives in some form or another. You know, so like knowing what the asterisk does and knowing how to conditionally implement it and stuff like that can be very useful in your application.
Yeah. Well, I think it also really fills out the mental model of what exactly Angular is doing. So, and that's maybe the most important piece. Having a mental model that works is super important, and it's not that hard to get like a working mental model that works for like 90% of use cases in Angular. But this is like the extra 5%. I feel like, like when something odd happens that you're not really expecting, that's when you have to kind of dive deeper and see about views and templates and all that stuff, and understanding what's going on between those.
So if it's okay, I actually have, you'd mentioned you weren't sure where structural directives are useful in the real world.
Yeah, let's talk about that.
I have a demo that I've used that uses all the things we've talked about today and builds an actual project that I use at work all the time. I just have to find it now. It's on page 1. Custom hooks, something about hooks, overlay, table. Did I only open source the table? No, I didn't. Haha. Okay. I was worried that I only had the React version.
Oh, I love a good table.
Look at this beautiful table. Just chef's kiss. The best design.
The best. Very good.
So you'll notice that we have an array here, right?
Yeah.
We have Pedro, Benjamin, so on and so forth. These were just randomly generated with Faker.
Sure.
And then we have a template, right? We call them ECP because the company is iCare Prime. But this is what I was allowed to open source so far.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
So we have the data table, which has an array of items. And then we have, I'll actually add a tiny bit of spacing so it's a little bit easier to read what's going on here.
Sure. This looks, have you ever messed with the CDK table?
Yes, I have. Yeah,
okay.
Very similar.
Very cool.
Yeah, I've just built my own because I like having a little bit more control over everything because I'm paranoid and broken. No, honestly, though, if you want actual good code, which this might not qualify, but if you want actual good code, go check out the CDK. The CDK is what I use for everything.
I wonder if this is still true. If I Google Angular CDK tables, I'm Googling it right now. Oh, it's been kicked down. I'm number 4 results. Yeah, there it is. That's me right there. Oh,
that's awesome.
Is that me? Yeah, click it. See if that's me. This is an article I would actually not recommend people read. I recommend doing stuff with RxJS that I actually would prefer people not do. Now it led me down a dark path.
You know what? I've read this before.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
This is by far my most read article. I don't have that many, but this one just exploded because somehow Google put it at the top of its algorithm for searching. So,
well, you know what it is? It's because there's like it. So like, let's go look at the CDK, and
for a while it was even being out this documentation right here.
Wow. Because I was gonna say this gives a super great example of super simple usage, but then go find more advanced usage.
Yeah,
that's my only big gripe with the CDK is that like, oh, they've actually seemingly added a few things since then.
I actually am enamored by the CDK. I think it's awesome and brilliant.
It's super great. Yeah.
They do an amazing job about not only like giving us a lot of really great like building blocks, but also showing us this is how how things should be done, and I think that's so valuable.
Yeah, I think that the CDK really sets Angular apart from most other like React or Vue or whatever, because it's like this frame of reference of like what we can utilize and what we should utilize in building on top of it. So definitely agree.
Absolutely. Yeah. Between CDK and the material project, it's so important to have those examples to point to.
Oh, 100%.
Even if you don't use them. So,
well,
yeah.
and what's nice is that like you can learn a lot from those code bases. So like, I'm doing another promo, don't hate me. But like a great example is like this article that I managed to write about like form control accessors of like understanding how they implement like the ng value accessor. I wouldn't have been able to find documentation on how to do this as well if it weren't for the materials design references. So I definitely appreciate what they're doing there. So
very cool. Yeah, I love the control value accessor too. Tables and forms are my jam. So we our like Venn diagram is pretty close, where we have tables in the middle. You have calendars, and I have forms on the other side.
I think I built so much because the company I worked for 2.5 years was like nothing but forms. So I think I built so many forms that I got burnt out. And
did you use the control value accessor, or did you?
I sure did. Okay.
Yeah.
But
I think that's like the hidden gem of forms, and I don't think many people use them.
Yeah, that's why I wrote the article, because it's like, this is such a powerful API. How is no one using it?
Yeah, for sure. I think it's very easily for things to get very messy very quick when you don't use it. It makes it hard to write good content for it, I feel like.
Definitely.
But yeah.
So to get back to the table, you'll notice that we have a definition for the columns, right? We have 2 columns here. And because of that, we have the name and the key. You'll notice that since we have in our TypeScript, we have age val, we're doing here age.val for the key so that we can just access that value right here. And then we also have a template.
That key's not in brackets, actually, to me.
The what?
The key is the key right there on line 9 is not in brackets. Like
it's a string.
Right. Okay. So you're going to use that instead of actually passing the value. You're going to pass in how to get to it. Is that
so?
Is that
here, let me get. I'm sorry,
maybe jumping the gun. Yeah.
No, you're good. You're good. Let's get rid of some of the extra stuff that's meant literally only to show off.
Sure.
Sometimes showing off makes things a little more confusing. So here, you'll see that we have the numbers of the ages, right? So the way that this works internally is that it works something along the lines of like item.age.value, and then it returns it here, and then it provides it to the let val context, the implicit value in the context, and then we can just use val. So instead of something like val.val, which is kind of confusing, right? Instead, we can just put the dot up here so that we can do like multiple references to it.
I see.
Right?
Okay.
That's pretty old.
Yeah.
Well, so you'll notice. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I was just saying the way I would have expected it to work. So I guess you're passing in key. I'm guessing you're doing something with that inside the data table column component or directive. I would have expected rather. I think this is the way the CDK does it. If you put that, you'd probably name it something different. Instead of key, it would just be value, I would think, and you just pass in the reference to that. But I think I'm seeing why you need that, though, right? Because right now you're defining how that key is going to be filled in, rather than actually what it is, right?
So let's say that we did ID instead. ID is just a way of saying that, hey, this is a unique tape. We could do val.age.val, and that would also work, right? So like we don't need to have key. Key is just like a preferential, it's nice to have, you know, like we only want to access this one value. The reason why I did it this way, this isn't implemented in this data table because this is just meant as like a baseline that you build on top of, is that let's say that we have, and this is what we have at work, sort. Right, so now we can, actually we'd have number, because now we just automatically have our data table can sort based on number, based on this key. We don't have to pass in anything else. which is super convenient. Or the same thing, if we could have filter number, right? So like if I append table here, and then I had something like input on text or whatever it is, then we could do table.filter or event.value, right? We'd have something like that. It's not text, it's input. It's something like that. Anyways, so that's another instance of something that we're doing at work that's enabled by this key being specific here.
Gotcha. Okay. Interesting.
But you know, there's 100 different ways to skin a cat. We could build different APIs here. This is just like a quick example of what we can do with the different APIs.
Right.
So here you'll see that we have a cell data table cell template, and we also have a data table header template. And that's how we're able to change the header to be a button. And we can also change the column values here.
Right.
So if we look at the implementation, we have 3 directives. We have a cell template directive, which literally is only a listener for the constructor. Same thing with the header directive. It's just provide the template, and that's all it's doing.
Nice.
But the reason why we have them differently is because under here, we can actually get rid of that. We can actually get, well, we can get rid of a bunch of stuff. But you'll see when we do a content child, we're looking for the header directive
specifically
here.
The header directive, right. And then elsewhere, the other one.
The cell directive, right. And this is because we just don't have access to the CSS selectors in content child. So this is what allows us to define the column. The column can have the key, right? Has the name, and then there is some stuff in here for sort, but we're not using it really.
Right.
And then finally, in the data table implementation, we say get the content children for the columns, pass in the items, and then we have an optional chaining utility, which basically makes it so that age.val works instead of just age. And then get the column value, and then our HTML is where the magic actually happens.
Nice.
So here we're saying for each of the column templates for the headers, let's go ahead and render the header template. And if there is no header template, then just provide a default one, right? And then pass a context with the column template name. And then same thing for table rows. We say for each item, and then for each item, make a row, and then for each column, generate a cell. And then we're using ngvar, which basically is just saying, like, we could replace that with ngif for simplicity's sake. And then get the value, aka 28, as val, provide it as the implicit value to the template, and then that's it, right? So like, it seems like a super simple API because, or at least we hope it looks like a somewhat simple API.
Well, that's the goal, right?
Yeah. And then this way we can just define our without having to do an ng4, without having to do any other type of logic. We just have a data table and 2 column definitions, right? Yeah.
So building, I feel like these structural directives are super powerful for building these sort of low-level components, dictionary building blocks. And I think this is actually a really good example of that. So thanks for sharing this. Thanks for open sourcing it. This is really neat.
Yeah, so, and then we can actually make it even simpler if we just do something like that. Because the structural directive is the same thing as an ng template. So, simplify. And then if you want really simple,
boom,
that's done. Yeah,
very nice. 4 lines. I like it. Not bad at all, sir. All right. Well, we're over time a good bit, but Corbin, was awesome having you on. Thanks for streaming. Thanks for coming on, sharing all this cool stuff, and writing articles to share with the world. I know you mentioned wanting to do more, contributing more back, but I think you've done a sizable amount already between your open source stacklets and your unicorn utterances. So Thanks so much for coming on. B-Man's giving you props too.
Yeah, thank you. Which, it's so crazy that B-Man is watching a stream that I'm on, because I've been following B-Man for a long time. So it's like,
nice.
Oh, wow. Like
B-Man's awesome.
Yeah.
B-Man, thank you so much for everything you do too, man.
Yeah.
it's just I don't know. I've been thinking about the themes of my stream. I feel like just like share the love is one of the biggest ones.
Yeah.
Like there's so many people out there doing so many awesome stuff. I just want to try to highlight those things and share some of that positivity going around. So
Definitely.
thanks for continuing to share that positivity, Corbin. And yeah, everyone, make sure you check out Corbin's channel. I'll put it up on screen one more time. Make sure you follow that. Make sure you keep eyes open for. I think you announced most of your stuff on Twitter. You do have really good branding from what I've seen there too. So
thank you.
Sweet. So sweet. Thanks everyone for showing up. Tomorrow we've got Alex Okrushko coming on. We're going to talk Firebase and NGRX a little bit. So I'm super excited for that one. But yeah, thanks everyone for showing up, and I'll see you tomorrow.
Yeah.
Bye, y'all.